Good afternoon, everybody. It's quite overwhelming and nerve-wracking being up here, I have to say. This is not my normal habitat, being amongst people who know a lot more about a certain field than I do, but it's humbling to be part of this environment, to see the way that research is really done, which is the complete opposite of how architects use the term research. We're not very collegial in our, I suppose that's because we're kind of very image-based. So it is fantastic to sort of listen, even though I don't understand, the complexities and how people sort of share information, and essentially how a group are all after and encouraging each other to try and come up with, one aim, one goal. It's not about kind of one person, it's about a myriad of people all kind of part of the puzzle. So for me, that's an amazing thing to be part of. And this talk is nothing like that, I suppose. We'll talk about why this is relevant to ME CFS and how this happened. But I'm Anthony Clarke, and this is
Hello.
Anna Kerr.
Can you hear me? I'm Anna Kerr. I am a patient, and I think my brain might be a little bit inflamed after this morning, just slightly. So
We'll start. I think we're going to quickly run through why we're here before we sort of get into the specifics about the work that I do and how we've come about having this relationship. So why are we here? We're here. You tell?
there was a screening of a little film that you may have heard of called Unrest last year at RMIT University in Melbourne, run by a partner of a patient, Sasha, who is a lecturer at the university. And this is a film most of you have seen, by a wonderful director called Jennifer Breyer, who is a severe patient and who also started a grassroots organisation for advocacy, global advocacy, called ME Action. I was at that screening on a Q&A panel with a bunch of other fantastic people, some of whom are here, and we were just at the end, and up pipes a question to the panel, which said, does architecture have a role in accommodating ME? And I kind of went to answer the question and actually got very choked up and quite emotional and stumbled my way through something and didn't really come up with an answer. Went home, was very, quite unwell for the next few days, but lay there thinking, why was I so choked up by this question? And I think for the first time in the years that I've had the illness, someone was asking me, how can the world accommodate you, rather than me as a patient having to always accommodate a world that is too loud, too fast, too busy, too noisy, to everything. And it really cut to the heart for me. And for it to come from a discipline that I hadn't thought about in terms of advocacy. We're always trying to get doctors to listen to us and researchers to come into the field and nursing and health professionals, but it came from an architect. And so I was very intrigued.
And so I suppose I'll tell you a quick bit about why I was there. My small practice over the past 6 or 7 years has done a series of commissions relating to specific conditions, nothing to do with ME CFS. So we've done projects for families with autistic children. We've done a project relating to how we can visualise how people with dementia understand sound. So we were commissioned with Dementia Australia to see whether, as part of their national conference, we could put the sort of misconceptions or how people perceive sound with dementia into some sort of physical installation, so that people who didn't have it, or friends or colleagues of people with dementia, could experience it and then have an empathetic response and start talking to each other about, this is why I can't go to a local cafe, this is why I can't do the things that we used to do as friends. So we did that project, and then the project that we did reasonably recently, which is the bottom one, which was for a man who was sexually assaulted as a boy and had a chronic sleep disorder that he had for 5 decades. And he had spent his life adapting his environment to suit all of the conditions, obsessive compulsive disorders and things like that, that he had developed because of what happened to him when he was a young boy. And because of that project, Brett, who's the man in the photo I've become very close friends with, was very open to sharing his story. So we did a piece on ABC, Radio National, and because of that, I got this amazing email, which you won't be able to read, but essentially it was from a young woman in the Barossa Valley, Taylor Ryan, who has chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, CFS. And she had seen the project and listened to the Radio National interview, and this was, you know, the most moving email or kind of explanation of something that I've ever read. Because of that, I then got involved with ME/CFS, which is where I've been spending more time with Anna, and some of you may recognise me through being part of this. And my role also as an architect, practicing architect, is that I take studios at university, master's level studios, where we start thinking about the education of how we educate architects. And generally, architects are educated in a way that is for the masses. So never do we tell students how to design or think about designing for people who are unique, or people who see the world in a different way, or people who experience the world in a different way. So I'm very lucky that Monash University are behind the work that we're doing, and so we're able to run these design studios. And as part of that, Emerge became involved, where we could put questions to people, you know, and very kind of layman, very basic questions, but trying to educate us in terms of how do people with ME/CFS actually live, and what does their existing condition do, what doesn't it do, what are the sensitivities, and what, as architects, if anything, can we do to start aiding those things.
So those questions were pretty profound for the patients who read them. And for me personally, they were questions I'd never even been asked by anyone before, even loved ones that I lived with the, you know, who were in and around me all the time. So they were along the lines of what's it like to live with. Doctors don't ask you this question. You work it out yourself, you talk to other patients. But they were so interesting and so sensitively asked and so detailed that it was quite a challenge for patients answering the questions to actually articulate their lived experience. And it was the first time I'd ever had to do that. So there were questions like, do you know your neighbours, and why don't you, or why do you? And how do you socialise with this illness? If you're in a darkened room all the time, why are you in a darkened room all the time? What is brain fog? What are some of the other questions? How do you parent your children? Now, these are questions that I've never seen being asked of this disease before, and to put it into words was quite a challenge. So there was this lovely sort of exchange between these very sensitive students and architects who were wanting to know more about the lived experience, and the patients who were having to put into words exactly what it's like. So the ripple effect from that one question that Anthony asked at the screening has been quite profound.
So as architects, we draw, that's how we communicate. I've seen there's obviously a lot of graphs and things which I don't understand that have been shown today, but this is also how we do our research. So Trevor, who's Taylor's father, is here, and this family has been unbelievably patient with me and allowing me to try and understand ME/CFS. I was flown over by Trevor to see the environment in which Taylor lives. I was lucky enough to spend 40 minutes in her room to try and understand what that is. She sends me photographs about what's important to her, moments that are important, how she routines her life. And we graph these, so as best we can. You know, these are graphed in terms of a normal person's day, and down the bottom is Taylor's day. You know, what parts of her mobility, at what time of the day, what action is that for? You know, this is Taylor kind of hour by hour, so it's saying, you know, when she may eat breakfast, when she may go to the bathroom. So we're starting to map, which is what we do as architects, we map existing conditions through cities or through individuals. We can then turn that into where is the majority of that time spent, and how may we design to better utilise the limited time that people with ME/CFS have. So how do we actually design something which can utilise those energy levels, or not take up any energy levels when you know they need to be maintained. And again, we do that through graphs where we need to understand the difference between us as people who don't have ME/CFS and people who do, and then how we may make small decisions where we're looking at things like isolation and loneliness, sensitivities. How do we start to bring moments where normally, you know, a father and daughter or a family member doesn't get to spend time with that person because of the existing conditions? Can we change that in some way where little moments allow them to connect with each other, or little moments allow them to connect as opposed to those the distances? So again, these are kind of slides showing how we as architects think about things, but also how we can use the education that I have as an architect to try and overlay that onto very different things, as opposed to, you know, art galleries and museums where we're kind of designing for everybody. You know, these are kind of reference images which we start looking at, you know, about mood, about moments. Taylor sort of spoke about things like, you know, the importance of seeing the shadows on a wall, for example, or the little moments where she might walk to the bathroom and see the bird bath, and you know, what she may touch for a moment. If she can only open one window in a day, what does that window feel like? What do you touch? What does it... So that everything kind of becomes quite special.
Yeah, and exploring into that level when you've been someone who does live in a room, and learning how to make that your world, and having to describe that to people who have never had that experience. It's not a very common one. So, you know, for someone who is in a situation where you're in bed all the day, you could watch the shadows on your ceiling, and that is your activity for the day. That is your entertainment. That is your passing of time. And to slow things down to that level, and to explain what that's like, has been the curiosity that the students have shown. It's just been a very hopeful experience for patients, that they have come to understand that on that level. So sort of working from the inside out rather than the outside in, working with, you know, what is your space most of the time, and if you're bed bound, it's your bed and it's your ceiling and it's corners of your room.
And again, this is extremely small text. One, because probably it's a little sensitive, probably, but I thought it's a very important slide, because this sort of brief, which is unbelievably rewarding, is very, very unusual. And so this is emails and correspondence that I get from Taylor, which is itemising her daily routine, broken down into, you know, 10 minutes, which would be, this is what I feel at this moment, this is what I do at this time, this is what's enjoyable about my day, how important something like brushing your teeth can be. So these sorts of emails, these sorts of communication is very, very unusual in my field, but ensures that we as architects can kind of use our knowledge for a kind of different purpose. And these are just sort of some quick references. You know, as architects, we read quite obvious things. We read things that kind of give us reference, which is generally design-based reference, as opposed to people sending me books like, you know, The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating, which is about a woman with chronic fatigue and how time slows down, and how Little bits of detail are important. Things like if you are lying down all day looking at timber ceiling, you become very connected to that timber ceiling, and details of it become important. Things that maybe we wouldn't, because of the pace of normal life, really think about or understand. So for me, those sorts of things are kind of profound because they're kind of quite unusual. This is a quick slide. So this is, again, what we do as architects. We graph, we model, we make things. And this is an early image of Taylor's project where, again, it's looking at all of the sensitivities. There's a therapy room linked to somewhere that she sleeps because with the chemical sensitivities, they need to be detached, and we need to be able to have somebody with certain smells, and then it opens up, gets all the air out completely before Taylor would transfer from one room back to another, which doesn't have those sensitivities dragged through. So these are kind of quite amazing outcomes based on very specific requirements, I suppose. I think so. I think we're 15. Yeah. So, yeah, the last slide, which we'll talk about just briefly, is what does all this mean and where can this go from here? So, an interesting conversation that I've been having with Heidi is, what do we do now? We've got this information. We understand that it would be important and it's worthwhile continuing to talk about architecture and its role within ME/CFS. And the potential of there being a dedicated healthcare facility clinical hub in Melbourne for people to come to. So we've been talking about that. Where would that be? What would that look like? What benefit does that have? Is kind of in development, I suppose. And that's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'd just like to thank all the speakers, especially this last one, and it's nice to hear the word empathy being put into all these different areas, which sometimes is never even thought of. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions because the live streaming is about to finish, and Heidi would still like to thank everyone for the conference. So I'll just like to thank you again for your time and your talk, and all the other speakers of this session too. Thank you.
So thank you to Sarah for chairing the session. And as Sarah said, the live stream is just about to finish. So I want to thank everyone that's joined us throughout the conference on Facebook and on Go Live. And we're going to carry on here for just another hour. And I'll be giving people in the room their instructions in just 2 minutes. But I just want to say thank you to, and also especially thank you to Jamin at the back, James, who did the sound for the last 2 days, and Daniel, who's been doing the sound and videos for us today. So Jake, we have a round of applause for Jamin. Thank you.
And of course, a big thank you to Heidi.
It's been done. It's been done.